Today I'm going to beat Valhiem using magic, but there's a twist. I'm going to attempt to beat Valhiem without using any other weapon types. But before we get into that, we need to go back to the beginning. This is Randolph, the lesser-known cousin of Gandalf the Grey, and more than anything, he wants to be just like his big cousin Gandalf. But Valhiem is perhaps even more cruel than Middle-earth, and he won't have access to magic in the beginning. So let's theorycraft for a moment. As of the release of this video, there are 7 biomes in the current build of Valhiem, and magic was only introduced in the 6th biome, the Mistlands. So somehow poor Randolph here needs to get through most of the game without any weapons. But there's one huge problem. Yo mama! Her tears are needed to unlock the required crafting stations, and she only cries when she dies. How we get there is up to us, but one thing's for sure, Modér has to go. Sadly, one does not simply walk into the mountains of Valhiem on their first day, so Randolph needs to make some preparations and develop some non-traditional forms of offense before he can take down a dragon. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get this challenge started. The first 2 materials I pick up are stone and wood. These are going to be the most important materials for the early days of this challenge, as they're used to craft our weapon of choice, the campfire. I hit the Eikthyr stone to get the closest altar location, but I have no plans on fighting him anytime soon, as it'll only make life more difficult for me with the Grey Dwarf raids. We grab the mushrooms and raspberries and quickly get to collecting more stone and wood. I build a hammer and an axe, which will only be used as a tool to harvest wood. One issue with the campfires is that they consume the wood once it's lit, so although I can recover the stone by deconstructing them, I will need to constantly replenish my wood supply. Next, I set off to try to find a structure with a beehive. Honey will be critical for me in maintaining my stamina, as using the hammer to build campfires requires quite a lot of it, and harvesting animals requires a lot of running around when you're spamming campfire. This is actually a method I've seen speedrunners use, and if you manage to time it right, it makes short work of boar and deer, although it is easy to burn yourself in the process. Since we will be moving at a fast pace, I don't plan on making a base this early on, as I'll likely need to jump between biomes to try to gain additional ways to defend myself. As such, I decided I'll be a hermit for the first part of this playthrough and only use temporary camps for the nights. While exploring in the fog on day 2, I got a little too close to a black forest and aggroed a skeleton. Lucky for me, there are absolutely no brains left in its skull, and it walked right into my fire. Later on, collecting some wood, I strolled too close to the Black Forest again and upset a troll. At this point, I wasn't prepared to deal with it, so I ran to break its aggro. Trolls aren't smart either, and they will walk into campfires, but it's going to take a lot longer than a skeleton, and I need a lot more wood. Once the troll had wandered away, I headed back down the hill, as there was another beehive in the abandoned house I'd passed, and the sun was getting low. I stay there for the night, repair my tools, and build a hoe. The hoe is my go-to in a no-map run for pathing abilities, but in this run I needed to help manage the grass fires I create every time I put a fire down. On day 3, I decided it's time to get into the Black Forest and gather some more resources. I would also love to find a burial chamber so I can get some surtling cores. I need bronze as soon as possible to build a cart so I can hermit around with all my loot. I quickly found some blueberries, carrot seeds, thistle, as well as a few ruined structures guarded by all sorts of enemies. A lone skeleton was guarding the middle tower, so I aggroed him and brought him to a pack of Grey Dwarfs. This helped thin them out a little bit, but the skeleton couldn't handle all of them, and to make matters worse, I got my first raid. I hadn't really clued into the fact that campfires count as base items, and spamming them means I can trigger raids out in the open. Luckily, it's an easy raid, and once it ended, I had to retreat into the meadows to try to clear out some of these Grey Dwarfs. And as luck will have it, I was able to snag the Heldör location while on the retreat. It takes a long time to take them out while simultaneously trying to restock my wood supply. I thought, why don't I try and take one out with a tree, and to my surprise it actually worked and I totally nailed one. During the chaos, a huge benefit of fire spread is demonstrated, as several grass fires I started managed to burn up some down logs and produce coal. This will be very handy when smelting metals, as I can skip the charcoal kiln altogether and save the surtling cores for other things. Finally, I managed to clear them all out and decided for night 3 I'd camp out under a nice big oak tree on a hill. On day 4, I continue my search for a burial chamber while also trying to uncover more of the map. I charge back into the Black Forest where we were the previous day and head up the coast with a bunch of friends following me. While running, I spot a shipwreck, which is a good source of fine wood that I can come back to later. I run until I find a house with another beehive and take out the remaining Grey Dwarfs chasing me with a little help from the bees. I grab the bees and return to collect the fine wood from the shipwreck, and then head back down the coast to an open meadow and find a village where I can repair my tools and stay the night. In the morning, I managed to uncover the full perimeter of the spawn island and end up back near the spawn stones. With my inventory completely jammed, I decided it's a practical place to set up some beehives and store a few things. While in the area, I also managed to snag the final deer trophy I would need for my fight with Eikthyr. With no sign of a burial chamber on the starter island, I cross the small river to the west of spawn and carry on down the coast, and I eventually hit another Black Forest where I find the first burial chamber of the run. Turns out burial chambers are a real pain without weapons, and I get very unlucky to have a skeleton archer in the entrance. The archers have no reason to close in on you, so it's pretty difficult to kite them into a fire. It's a good thing it's just normal difficulty, as I would have been dead several times by now dealing with this one annoying archer. Finally, I get it by kiting it into some narrow halls and dodge rolling past it, and break line of sight so it'll finally follow me and walk into my fire. After that I get my first surtling core and soon after find 2 more without too much trouble. With 3 down I only need 2, but I'm stuck between a 1-star archer and a spawner room that I'm really not sure how to deal with. Normally a club or a stag breaker can take out a spawner easily, but with campfires I can't do any damage to. While I'm trying to figure something out, it decides to spawn a rancid remains for me to play with. These guys are much tougher than normal skeletons, and I end up dancing around several fires to finally take it out. Running low on wood, I return to the surface and continue searching to see if I can find another burial chamber that might be a bit easier to deal with. I end up back in a meadow, and after collecting enough wood and stone, I head back along the opposite coastline and end up hitting a mountain biome. This is great, as it will be an opportunity for me to get some tamed wolves early on, and hopefully find the boss location for Modér. I backtrack into the Black Forest and find another burial chamber, but before I can enter, I start a skeleton and great off war to thin out the mobs in my way. Once inside, I'm again very unlucky and have an archer in the first room. Not only that, but while I take cover behind the rocks, a ghost comes up and nearly kills me. I need to bail and regain some health, but it's night when I get topside, so I build a little shelter in the entrance for the night. The next morning, I head right back in and deal with the archer and the ghost. Thankfully, the ghost is not too bright and happily cooks itself. We get super lucky and find the 2 remaining surtling cores we needed without running into further danger. With the surtling cores in hand, it's time to head back to the spawn stones and get ready for Eikthyr. I could mess around with trolls to mine copper and tin, but I figure getting my own pickaxe is less risky. It also comes with the advantage of being able to do more terrain manipulation and gather roxies. Before we fight the boss, I figure Randolph's earned a shirt, so we scorch another deer and make him a nice leather tunic. Now we fill up on wood and stone and head to the closest boss altar. I've never tried this before, but I've seen plenty of speedrunners tackle Eikthyr with campfires, so I'm not too worried. I spam fires where it's going to spawn, and sure enough it takes a huge chunk of its health right away. Perhaps it's a little unfair how effective this is, but given how hard things will become later, I'll take this win. A bit of kiting around and this battle's over in no time at all. I did take a few hits, so I will need to improve moving forward as things are only going to get harder from here. Back to the spawn stones, I place the trophy and grab the power. This is going to be huge, as soon I'll be punching above my weight and the buff will be critical. After making the pickaxe, I head straight back to the closest Black Forest and see if I can get a few quick ores to make a cart. Sadly, I'm immediately attacked by a bunch of Grey Dwarfs and they must be getting wise to my method as they're cleverly getting the wet debuff to counter my fire. It's nearly dark, so I bail back into the meadow and spend another night under that nice oak tree on the hill. The morning of day 10, I head back into the Black Forest and manage to get some tin and locate a copper vein. The Grey Dwarfs are mostly just a nuisance, but once I start mining the copper, I hear the dreaded footsteps of a troll. I was not wanting to take the risk, but since there's one here now anyway, I might as well let it help me mine a little bit. Somehow I manage not to mess this up, and the troll does break a few ore for me. I grab the ore and take off back to the base to start smelting. I need to collect more wood so I can burn it for coal, but I had a minor incident with a tree and nearly killed myself. And then I realize I'm a big dummy, and although I got enough tin and copper for bronze nails, I forgot that I need more copper to build the forge first. The next morning it's storming, but since I messed up, I now have to run all the way back to the Black Forest in the rain to get the remaining copper I need. Luckily for me, the troll doesn't show up this time, so I'm able to get what I need while kiting around the annoying Grey Dwarfs. Back at base, I get to smelting the remaining copper while I make some more coal with the fire spread trick. That is the easiest stack of 50 coal you will ever see. Finally, I have enough copper to make a forge and the bronze nails for the cart. With that milestone, we can break camp and begin our lives as a proper hermit. Up until now, I had forgotten to check where the Heldör is on my map, and to my disappointment, it's north, which I believe means it's on another island. I know I can make a carve pretty soon, but they don't have a lot of storage, and I've collected a lot of stuff. I decided it's better to head south for now and see if I can find a place to hang out near the mountain in Black Forest where I can work on some upgrades. If I'm lucky, I'll find another Heldör pointing stone and a location that I can walk to. Who needs a carve anyway when you can swim with a cart? I actually had no idea you could do this, but I'm happy you can, as it makes the river crossing a lot easier than having to break this and carry everything by hand. As night falls on day 11, I make it to a clearing and decide to hunker down under a dolmen for the night, as it can easily be made into a quick shelter. On the morning of day 12, I carried on towards the mountain and found a village at the junction between the meadows, Black Forest, and a mountain edge. I figured this would be a good place to set up for a while and try to tame some wolves. I was sadly mistaken, as being so close to the Black Forest brings in straggler Grey Dwarfs constantly. And while dealing with some of those Grey Dwarfs, I ended up attracting a wolf way too early and had to run away. Luckily for me, it did deal with the Grey Dwarfs. The wolf chased me back to the village, taking down everything that stood in its way. I decided to hide on the roof of a house, and so did this clever little greyling. After the coast was clear, I went back to investigate and found that the wolf broke my cart during its rampage. But on the plus side, now I knew there was a single wolf in the area, so I was able to lure it into a small pen near the village. Unfortunately, the plan was not working well, and I nearly died trying to trap it. After a while, I realized it was easier to stand on this rock and just fence it in. It's not much of a fence and requires a tree and a rock to keep it standing, but it's working for now. So with the wolf trapped, I threw in some food and things were looking great. That is until the great orcs decided to show up again. Now, I had not realized that great orcs would be so attracted to the wolf, which is very annoying as it prevents the wolf from calming down and starting the taming process. I then had the terrible idea of setting up a bunch of fires to try to keep them away. And of course this backfired and triggered a raid. Funny enough, the great orcs was much more interested in the wolf than me, but I decided I would sacrifice the wolf to help clear them out. Sadly, it was killed in the battle, but not before it took a few down. Without the wolf, it took forever to clear the rest of the raid mobs, which is exactly why I need a wolf army. After they were cleared, I collected some loot and was very lucky to find a wolf trophy. It's sad I had to sacrifice my first attempt at a tame, but it's pretty good loot. After that disaster, I decided to move the wolf trap closer to the mountain, but more importantly further from the Black Forest. I start with a terrain wall to block off the view from the forest, and I'll dig a pit on the mountainside to trap the wolves. I spent the next several days taming my first wolf, which was finally tamed on the night of day 16. I took it back to my house and it nearly died right away after stepping in my fire. It's clear that wolves are glass cannons, and despite being able to take down the great orcs quickly, they're pretty squishy themselves. Of course, a single wolf is no good, so I spent several more days taming a second one. One huge benefit of the wolves is their support in hunting deer and boar is much easier than chasing them with fire. On day 19, our first wolf cub was born, and they're cute little buggers. But they're like most kids and don't listen. Very hard to get them to go where you want, and they will not follow you. We get a second cub by day 20, and I decide it's time to leave them at home while I search around for more tin and copper. They're too hard to control and keep alive deep in the Black Forest. A troll can kill them in one swing. After a bit of grinding, I make a bronze axe in the morning of day 25 and get to collecting some fine wood. It's here I learned the hard way that wolves and falling trees don't mix, and sadly one of my wolves is killed. On day 26, I decide to explore the mountainside a bit, but end up getting another wolf after me. I figure I might as well trap it, but I forgot I had modified my wolf trap to get my last wolf out of the pit. This was my first death, and it was totally avoidable. After retrieving my body, I end up getting myself into trouble in the Black Forest at night. I end up cornered in a stone tower with bees and skeleton archers. This is my second death. I'm an idiot. By day 27, I make a leather cape to complete the leather armor set, which doesn't help much as a day later I end up getting myself killed again in a burial chamber, this time due to a skeleton archer and smoke inhalation. Things are starting to come off the rails and my wolves can't help me in dungeons. I'm gonna need another plan. I decide to take a bit of a break and make a small carrot farm and a batch of poison resist meads. After that, I start packing up my cart for my next adventure, but I also need to build a portal near the spawn stone so I can always get back. By day 32, the carrots are ready to harvest and I'm nearly done packing up for the relocation, so I decide to head down the far coast of the island on the other side of the mountain. Traveling with a cart through a hilly Black Forest and 3 wolves is no easy task, and to make matters worse, there are several trolls I need to avoid as they will for sure end my wolves. The wolves can't keep it in their pants while on the trip and we end up with a few new cubs along the way. At the end of day 34, I set up an outpost in a stone tower. For day 35, I leave the wolves at the outpost and scout ahead. And I find exactly what I'm looking for, a swamp. Now, unfortunately, I had planned to use my wolves to protect me in the swamp, but I've since realized they're not durable enough. That's okay, as I found another volunteer. A log troll is very helpful and takes out quite a few swamp enemies for me. Eventually, the troll's taken down, but not before it provided me with plenty of new loot, including the skin right off its back. Now that I have a swamp, I really need to get some more surtling cores so I can build a portal without sacrificing my smelter. This means I'm going to need to go back into the barrel chambers, which so far is my least favorite part of this challenge. I die a couple more times to a ghost, but I do end up snagging 3 more surtling cores, so it wasn't for nothing. On day 37, it's time to leave the outpost and get closer to the swamp. I find a huge rock and copper sticking out of the side of the mountain that overlooks the swamp and decide this might be an okay place for a base for now. I do need to be careful because I can see and hear drakes high up the mountain. It takes a couple of days to throw this mess together, but it gets the job done, and it's mostly just to keep my wolf safe while I probe around the swamp. Day 41 is a complete disaster, and during a thunderstorm, a log troll comes to my base. I desperately try to save my wolves by running away, but then they end up aggroing a blob and they're all killed by the poison. I wake up on day 42 to a lonely and empty home, but my sadness starts to wash away when I spot this beauty on the mountainside next to the swamp. Iron is one of the things I need to progress, and I managed to smelt 6 ore from here. It's not much, but it's a start. After that, I build a portal to get back to the spawn stones as an escape plan if things get out of hand again. At this point, there are 2 things blocking me from further progression to my goal. I need more iron, and I need dragon tears from Modér. I need the dragon tears to build an artisan table and the iron for a blast furnace. This means I'm going to need to make frost resistance meads, but I'm not really sure how to attack leeches with my option. Lucky for me, the local trolls can help once again, and this also nets me enough troll skin for some armor upgrades. I decide it's probably safer to make a crop farm and beehives at the spawn stone base, so I spend a day or 2 setting that up. Once that's done, I find Heldör and he laughs at how poor I am. So I spend a few more days exploring for treasure and gold. I'll need to buy the belt eventually if I have any hope of collecting dragon eggs. On day 48, I bring my 2 backup wolves to the spawnstone base where they'll be safe. No star wolves can't really help me in the swamp or mountains, but they can guard my farm and I'll use them to hunt game in the meadow. On day 51, my frost meads are ready, so I set out to explore the mountains. It doesn't last long before drakes and wolves chase me back into the swamp, but it turns out to be a stroke of luck as I find some turnip seeds. I go plant some turnips and upgrade my troll armor before deciding it's probably time for a boat. I build a carve and sail to another island with a much larger swamp. Sadly, I don't find any more obvious iron, but I do get some guck. After that, I spent several more days searching for treasure and exploring the mountains to eventually find a frost cave. I went in and quickly realized bats are going to be a major pain, but with enough trial and error, they will fly into fires and cook themselves. I grab a couple Fenrir's fangs, but before I can find anything else, an Ulv chases me out. Back at the farm, the turnips are ready, so I can finally make a spice rack and get some better food. With better food and more frost meats, it's time to search the mountains for the Modér Vegisphere stone. I still also need to find treasure to sell to Heldör. Eventually, I find another frost cave, but this one turns out to be a howling cavern. I'm definitely not ready for that, so I mark it on the map and move on. I spend a bit more time on the mountains at night and a couple of Fenring spawn. Lucky for me, a golem takes them out. Golems are actually pretty handy, so I kite one around as a bodyguard, given they'll fight anything. When my frost resistance runs out, I explore the Black Forest and meadows some more and collect treasure. I realize the barrel chambers are probably my best bet for treasure, and I'm gonna need surtling cores anyway, but I really struggle in them, so I need a new plan. I decide to craft a bone shield, and it turns out to be a great strategy to block the skeletons and push them into fires. With this new strat, I find enough treasure and half a dozen surtling cores in no time. Now I finally buy the belt from Heldör and get back to the mountains. And after a bit more exploring, I find the Vegisphere stone and also a dragon egg. Now that I have the Modér location, it's time to break camp and move closer to the boss. But before I leave, I need to make a small outpost next to Heldör so I can get back to him later. I move as much as I can through the portal to my spawn stone base, and then I set out with a full cart. This was a real pain, and I ended up dying to some wolves. I responded to the spawn base, and I figured I'd bring my wolves to help. But before I could do that, a raid started, and the shaman's poison took them all down. I took the long walk back to my gravestone, and by luck I found 2 of the unplanned wolf cubs from my first expedition. I'm very thankful those wolves got busy on that trip. With their help, I retrieve my things and make it to Heldör. I set up a pen for the wolves and begin repopulating them at this location. I guess Heldör can watch over them for now. Next, I head to the coast to build a boat. Then I fill it with my metals and dragon egg, and I head off to find the Modér mountain. While looking at my map, I find out you can remove the marker with one click, which isn't great, so I had to make my own mark. I hit another island almost right away, but it's nowhere close to Modér, so I sail around it and eventually hit open ocean again. After a couple days, I make it to what's likely the Modér island and look for a place to make an outpost. I find this very convenient coastal stone tower that's also vacant, so I snag it for my new outpost. I then realize that I don't know how portals work, and I can't get this one to connect. I guess it's because my other 2 are already connected. So unfortunately, I need to leave materials and sail back. And this turns out to be easier said than done. Soon after setting sail, I end up in a storm on the ocean, which is not a good situation, as I have no way of dealing with serpents. To avoid them, I get closer to the coast, but it's really hard to see, and I end up in a swamp. I try to find something else, but I have no luck, and I'm looking at the map, and it seems like I might be in a river flanked by swamps. On the bright side, this could be a shortcut back to the spawn island, but the wind is not helping me now, and I'm barely outrunning all the leeches. I do notice a surtling spawn that's basically in the water, so that could be a good place to come back and farm cores later, and I mark it on my map. Shortly after that, I get a real scare, as an abomination is hiding in the water and emerges right next to me. I was pretty sure I was going to be killed here, but I got lucky and it got stuck for a few seconds, so I was able to get just far enough away to avoid its attacks. I finally made it through this spooky river cruise, and it is a huge shortcut that's very risky to use. To get my new outpost portal working, I unfortunately disconnect the Heldör portal, but I'll have to deal with that later. At the new outpost, I spend a few days getting set up, making new foods and meats. After that, we poke around the area and find a 1-star troll friend to help us in the nearby swamp. While the troll keeps everybody busy, I search for muddy scrap pals. I then get front row seats to a battle of 2 titans while my troll friend takes on an abomination. The troll wins the first round, but a second abomination shows up and he's already weakened. I need to help him out with a bonfire to make sure I get those sweet roots. After all that, I have 7 more iron ingot and a root harness, so things are looking pretty good. After that, I do some mountain exploring and manage to locate another dragon egg and find some onion seeds. Now I just need to prepare for Modér and make my way to her spawn altar. I also need to come up with a plan to take her down. I don't want to use exploits, so I can't hide under the altar and cheese the fight. I decide wolves are probably the best option, but I need tougher ones. Eventually, I manage to get all 3 eggs to the altar, but I'm killed by a golem in the process. And now the golem is locked in an eternal battle with a bunch of drakes next to the altar, which might be a good thing at keeping them away when I summon Modér. It seems I'm pretty unlucky with the terrain around the Modér spawns, so I'm going to have to try to bring her to a better spot when we finally do this battle. A bit later, after a lot of messing around, I finally managed to trap a 1-star wolf. I would have liked a 2-star, but I don't have the patience to wait for one to spawn. Many in-game days went into raising the 1-star wolf army while I tended to other things like farming and resource collection. Eventually, I had amassed 18 iron and managed to breed just under 21-star wolves. I left a pair of backup wolves at the outpost and started trying to move the wolves up the mountain. This was a massive pain as the number of drakes and wild wolves seemed endless. The drakes would attack my wolves and the wild wolves would attack me. Eventually I'd found a stone tower that I decided to make my wolf collection point. This was tough given the small space, and I was actually killed by a sneaky undercover wolf that snuck in. Once I got a portal built in the stone tower, it was easier for me to get back and forth, but of course the wolves need to be escorted over land. And with this started a string of unfortunate events, as I died several times trying to get my wolves into position. There were just too many drakes and wild wolves, and then stone golems all over the place. I think I rage quit a couple of times during this, but I eventually got all my stuff back. During one of my many back and forward trips, I went through the plains and gathered some cloudberries and got my first death mosquito encounter. Luckily with the root harness, they're not that bad. I actually ended up luring a troll in, which killed some fewlings, and I got my first piece of black metal scrap. I can't do much with it yet, but that's a problem for later. And finally, by day 108, I was ready to face Modér. Or so I thought. I went to try and scout a safe path to the altar and of course woke up a stone golem. I tried to kite it away from my outpost, but the wolves were so excited they attracted it back. The next few minutes were terrible as the golem bashed down my stone walls and killed all of my wolves while I was completely helpless. I was so angry and depressed after something like 40 days in game preparing for this fight, all ruined in minutes, that I nearly gave up on the challenge. But eventually I regained my will to go on and decided I needed a different strategy. Rather than getting my wolves up to Modér, I was going to need to get Modér to my wolves. So I found a small patch of meadows and set up an area there. By day 121 I had rebuilt my wolf army, but this time I had well over 21 star wolves. And with them positioned in the meadow they were safe until I could bring Modér to them. The plan was simple. I would have to kite her down and around the mountain and through the Black Forest until we reached this meadow. It did work, but it wasn't as easy as I thought. Modér kept landing and just sitting around, so I had to try to bait her to fly again. It took something like 15 minutes and a few near-death scares, but I did finally get her close enough that I could bring the wolves into the Black Forest to battle. Now all that was left was to release the hounds and bring them right to her. She got a shot in at them as they advanced and took down several, but once they got her surrounded, it was all but over. I was so relieved that this was working. It was actually very efficient. In less than a minute, the wolves tore her to pieces, and I finally had my hands on her tear. This was a huge boost to my morale, as Modér's defeat was the first major step in my progression towards magic weapons. I made my artisan table and blast furnace and started to process my first black metal scrap. The next phase of this journey is focused on collecting the necessary resources to build magic weapons. But before I could head off into the Mistlands, I needed to gather a few things from the plains. My strategy for the plains was to eat 2 stamina foods and run through collecting what I could. I had no means to fight the Fuelings head on, so I planned to kite swamp or mountain mobs into their camps and let them battle it out. I spent something like 20 days raiding Fueling camps and stealing anything not bolted down. I would scavenge the remains of all the battles like a vulture picking at corpses. I did get Randolph killed a couple times, but the strategy did net me enough black metal, barley, and flax to move on. One of my deaths was particularly difficult as I died in a Fueling camp, which led to a painful and slow process of recovering my items. I had to try and grab something quick from the inventory and run before getting clubbed to death, which didn't always work out. Eventually, with my things recovered, I needed to find a safe place in the plains for a simple barley and flax farm. Lucky for me, I remembered something I had seen during my mountain hiking. A super convenient patch of plains generated on the plateau of a frost cave entrance halfway up a cliff. This provided me with just enough room for a small farm, bonfire, and a portal. I did a few more random things during this part of the run, such as buying the headlamp from Heldör and farming some wraiths for chain. Finally, by day 155, Randolph had a black metal axe and some barley wine fire resist. He was ready to sail in search of the Mistland. My plan for the Mistlands was to find a safe area close by where I could set up a mini base and portal. Once that was in place, I would sail around the Mistlands coast looking for areas free of mist and diverter structures that I could use as protection. I set up in a black forest just across from some Mistland islands and ended up finding a diverger dock. This was a great find, but it gets even better as there was a ruined bridge pillar to the west and an infested mine to the east of the dock. After that, I got even more lucky when a serpent decided to follow me to the dock and the diverger took it down in shallow water. Not only did this allow me to get some great food, but more importantly, the serpent shield. Now I know tower shields aren't loved in this game, but for this challenge there's really no benefit to parrying enemies. The serpent shield provides much more useful pierce resistance and enough blocking power for me to handle some of the Mistland enemies. It even worked on no-star seekers so long as I avoided their blunt attack. Shield alone made the infested mines a lot easier. I simply blocked the ticks and secret brood, knocking them back into campfires. This made collecting my first few black cores pretty easy, and it was very surprising as I figured I would die a lot in the infested mine. With that confidence, I felt unstoppable. I went in search of another infested mine, hopefully to find the remaining black cores I needed. I sailed pretty far, scouting the coast for areas where there was no mist or a visible structure. I actually ended up finding the Queen Boss location by chance. Eventually my luck ran out, and I was sailing through some islands and turned to see a gal right in front of me. I panicked and tried to stop before it saw me, but it was too late. I turned and tried to escape, but the gal rained fire on my car. It only took a few shots to destroy my boat and leave me stranded in the water with ticks on my tail. Couldn't make it to the beach before I was blown away. This was a terrible setback given how far away from my base I died. I had made a semi-close portal, but it was still a pretty far trip by boat. I decided it was time to upgrade to the longship, given how fast the gal destroyed my car. The preparations took a few days, but eventually I was able to get close to my remains, and while trying to sneak around from another angle, I hit another diverger dock. I wish I had seen this the first time, as it might have been okay with their help. There was really only one way I was going to be able to get my items back. I was going to have to lure the gal to the diverger and hope they could kill it, or at least distract it long enough for me to get to my stuff. I was a bit nervous, but in the end, a 1-star ice mage managed to take it down and clear the way for me to retrieve my item. There were a few ticks still around, but luring them back to the mage worked like a charm. Soon after, Randolph discovered a massacre had occurred at the first diverger dock he had visited. A Gaul had destroyed the place and left ticks on the roof. This is sad, but the silver lining is that now Randolph can obtain a sap extractor from the chest. Although first he has to clear out the ticks. With the sap extractor, we decided to explore a larger island that had a black forest and mountain bordering some Mistlands. After a bit of running around, I managed to find a route right on the edge and set up a sap extractor. I was also able to find some mist-free areas and navigate a bit deeper into the Mistlands, which eventually led me to another infested mine right next to a diverger base. This was great, as the diverger helped me clear out the seekers guarding the mine, and I was able to take it over as a new outpost. Randolph headed into the mine and encountered his first 1-star seeker. Luckily, they can't get up on the entry platform and can slowly be burned like everything else in the mine. And finally, Randolph found a couple more black cores, which was all he needed to build the next key crafting station, the Eikthyr refinery. Eikthyr refineries can be a bit dangerous as they emit radiation in all directions that damages structures and mobs alike. But Randolph's smart and he dug a pit to limit the damage. Things were really looking up and the first batch of Eikthyr would be ready soon, but I had no idea how difficult it would be obtaining soft tissue. You see, soft tissue is normally mined from giant remains in the Mistlands, but I had not found a single one. What I had collected so far was from slain Diverger and the crates in their bases destroyed by enemies. But that's a problem for later, as I had just enough to make a Heldör table and my very first magic weapon. I chose to make the Staff of Embers as I figured it'd be the most effective with its AoE. And of course, Randolph had to test out his new toy with the locals to make sure they know who's boss. And hot damn, it feels good to finally have an offensive weapon after nearly 200 days. However, this experiment exposes the next problem, and Randolph's food is not good enough to launch more than a few fireballs. So now I have two short-term goals. I need to produce more Eikthyr, and I need to improve my foods to increase my Eikthyr bar. I decided to focus on Eikthyr production first, but before I could mine any giant skulls, I was going to need a pickaxe upgrade. This means it's time for revenge against the Fuelings. To obtain black metal scraps, I'd need to make a black metal pickaxe. And what a change it made to have a ranged weapon option. It was pretty nice to chip away at the Fuelings from a distance and kite around any that chased me and blast them with fireballs. And after clearing out a single camp, I had plenty of black metal scrap to haul back to base. While I waited for the black metal to smelt, I went back to the Mistlands to explore around a bit. I ended up finding a Diverger extraction site not far from my outpost. This was great as a giant skull full of soft tissue was sitting right in the middle of their fortification. The only problem was I couldn't touch it without starting a fight. So I did what anyone would do and lured a nearby Gaul to help me out. At the very least, it would break some of their crates and give me a bit more soft tissue. And sure enough, this is exactly what happened, despite the Gaul being taken down quite easily by the rogues. When I tried to make it back to my outpost, I ran into another Gaul and had to bring it back to see my friends. And this time I got to see the power of a 2-star rogue as he destroyed the Gaul with ease. When I did make it back to my base, the black metal was ready and I finally upgraded from the antler pick. It was at this point that I did some research online and found a great trick for acquiring soft tissue. By placing individual Eikthyr around Diverger crates and chests, the radiation will eventually destroy them and it's not considered a hostile act. Armed with this knowledge, I took the few Eikthyr I had left and went around to my friends' places and robbed them blind. This netted me enough Eikthyr to make a second item which I decided would be the Staff of Protection. The same trick can be used against Diverger wards, which when destroyed remove any claim the Diverger had on the area. With the ward destroyed, I was able to clean out the giant skull on the excavation site and net a whopping 56 soft tissue. This gave me plenty of Eikthyr, so I rewarded myself with a nice feather cape. I would have made some armor, but I had not realized I needed linen thread, so I had to wait a bit for flax to produce what I needed. To kill some time, I moved on to my second goal of improving my foods. To make better foods, I was going to need to upgrade my cooking station. One of the upgrades is the butcher table, which requires silver. I had skipped silver when I was in the mountains, so I figured now I'd go back stronger than ever and try to find some. Because I had not beaten Bonemass yet, I had to use the stag breaker to look for buried silver veins. I didn't consider this using a weapon, but rather a tool. I found some silver after a bit of searching and collected enough to make the butcher table. I also used some of my other metals to make pots and pans. This unlocked Yggdrasil porridge and Seeker aspic, which greatly improved my Eikthyr bar. Linen production was still taking a while, so I decided to craft the Staff of Frost and the Dead Riser while I waited. I was feeling pretty confident with my new tools, so I wanted to try them out on a Gaul. But this did not go as planned. I forgot to use my barley wine and overestimated how effective the bubble shield was. I had to do a walk of shame to retrieve my items, and after getting killed again soon after, I needed a win. Also, with all that dying, I crapped my troll pants and finally upgraded to some Eikthyr weave pants. With my ego in shambles, I did what anyone would do, and I picked a fight with someone weaker than me. It was finally time to take on the Elder, and it was quite easy given his weakness to fire. Next, I set my sights on Bonemass, but I had never been in any sunken crypts and I had no idea where it was, nor did I have the withered bones needed to summon it anyway. So to kill two birds with one stone, I went to a large swamp on my main island and located a couple sunken crypts. It only took 2 sunken crypts to find the boss altar, 10 bones, and a boatload of iron. The Bonemass altar was on a different island to the east, so I packed up some supplies and set sail. And this island turned out to be a happening place, with both Heldör and the Bog Witch, as well as a pretty big plains that I was hoping I could find the Yagluth altar or at least a Vegisphere stone. I got a bit distracted and ended up raiding a bunch of fueling villages while searching for Yagluth, but I couldn't find it. I know from the internet that finding a Yagluth Vegisphere is extremely rare, so after I had enough totems from the fuelings, I went back to focusing on Bonemass. The plan for Bonemass was simple. Take a poison resist mead, stand on his altar, and blast him with the Staff of Frost. Before the fight, I upgraded my helmet to the Eikthyr Weave hood and made some better foods to improve my chances. At this point, you might be wondering why my house looks a little different, and I can explain. I clicked out of the window at one point to Google something, and when I clicked back in, I accidentally launched a fireball into the middle of my living room. Unfortunately, I wasn't recording at the time, but trust me when I say that almost everything was destroyed, and anything made from wood turned into coal. I threw the bones into the altar, and the Bonemass appeared. And it all went pretty smoothly as expected, but it did take a lot longer than the Elder. After that, I popped in to visit the Bog Witch, but mostly just because it was new to me. I didn't have any gold on me and I figured I could go on without her stuff anyway. I already knew where the Queen was, but I wanted to be more prepared with better gear and upgrades before taking her on. And it sure would be a lot easier to explore the Mistlands with a Wisp Light, which meant I really needed to buckle down and find Yagluth. I spent days searching around several planes and couldn't find a single hint. In the end, much like it seems most experienced, I found the altar directly. I knew this battle wouldn't be too bad, but before the fight I tried to clear the area and do a bit of spawn proofing to avoid any unwelcome participants during the fight. I spawned him in and started blasting him with the Staff of Frost while circling around the altar, avoiding the meteors and fire breath. It all went pretty well, but I did have a bit of a scare when a growth decided to sledge me in the back. Their attacks slow you down, which could have ended badly if there were meteors inbound. In the end, Yagluth went down and Randolph collected his Torn Spirit, which was all he needed to make the Wisp Fountain. That very night, Randolph caught his first Wisp and built the Wisp Light. With this new item, it was time to head back into the Mistlands to gather materials and search for Sealbreaker fragments. Areas in the mines that were previously too misty to explore safely were now accessible, and Randolph found a few Sealbreaker fragments in no time. Things were really starting to fall into place, and after only a few more days, Randolph was able to craft the Sealbreaker. During the mist exploration, he also found enough materials to upgrade his weapons. It was now time to face off with the Queen, so I built a portal outside the infested citadel, made some preparations, and opened the door. I was pretty worried about this fight given the fight's indoors, but that might actually be what made it more manageable. If things got a little too hot, Randolph could always step outside for a breather. Regardless, he died a couple times, mainly because he kept getting disoriented and lost in there. The best strategy was to hit her with a few fireballs and retreat into the entrance hallway. This allowed Randolph a bit more time to deal with the seeker she spawns before repeating the process. Sometimes he even got a few cheeky hits in when the Queen's big booty clipped through the wall. It took a really long time, but eventually Randolph took her down. Back to the spawn stones to hang up her head, and now it's down to only one more boss. But he was going to have to go to hell and back to complete this challenge. With the Queen defeated, Randolph now had the means to build the Artisan Press upgrade for the Artisan Table. This new addition allows for the construction of ceramic plates, which are used to build the Drakkar ship. The Drakkar is our ticket to the Ashlands, as it can withstand the boiling waters that cover the southern part of the ocean. And it is absolutely massive, making it a bit comical to see little Randolph sitting at the controls of this behemoth. It's now day 250, and Randolph has completed his preparations for a hopefully successful amphibious landing into Hell. Using the motor ability, he quickly sails south and enters the reddish waters. As the spike pillars begin to appear, he is attacked by a Bonemass serpent. To add to the fun, a storm starts as well. With the serpent chasing us, we rush to the closest pillars to set down a crafting table, because if this boat breaks, it would be an unthinkable tragedy. We then switch to the Staff of Frost, and it's quite effective against the beast, but it's a bit tricky to target from the boat while rocking up and down in the wave. He eventually takes it down and repairs the boat, but now we've drifted into a bit of a jam. The Drakkar is durable, but it's not easy to maneuver, and we can barely fit between some of these pillars. After backing out and shooting a new course, we head into our first Vulture experience. They're not particularly difficult, but they're very annoying. And now with the rest of buff nearly expired, Randolph makes a temporary portal on a pillar and heads back to base to sleep. On day 251, we encounter another serpent while trying to navigate through the pillars, and Randolph nearly kills himself mining a new resource. I finally get eyes on the shore and spot a structure on the beach, which seems like a decently safe landing site. With the materials he brought, Randolph was able to set up a small outpost and make the shield generator to keep it safe from the firestorm. While getting set up, a lava blob hops over and explodes on death. This does loads of damage to the Grouston structures, which is a reminder that our best defense here will be using the hoe to make terrain walls. The area around the base is not too bad, but there are a few spawners in sight. We also have a few Diverger rogues wandering around, which is nice. Sadly, it becomes quickly apparent that the Ashlands is not like previous biomes. You cannot explore safely, as enemies are constantly coming in all directions. I never had a chance to play Ashlands when it first came out, but I know there's been a nerf to the spawn rate since. My hat's off to anyone who braved that pre-nerf, as it's still insanely difficult now. Due to the constant attacks, the only strategy that seems to work is constant movement. Most of the enemies aren't that difficult in small groups, but if you stand and fight, you can never really catch your breath, and eventually you'll be surrounded. With this in mind, I started scouting up and down the coast, so that at least threats were only coming from one side. I found a few Morgan caves and some rogue outposts, and also ran into my first Morgan, which was surprisingly not that bad. After quite a distance wandering down the coast, I actually ran into the boss arena. But before I can spawn the boss, I'm gonna have to get brave and head inland to find some charred fortresses. Moving inland really ramped up the difficulty. With all the lava lakes, the run and gun option was made much less reliable, as you can get stuck and often need to turn around and charge back into the conga line of things chasing you. Another massive problem is the Askven seem to spawn more inland, and they were much more of a threat than the charred due to their speed and their blunt attack. I had kept the root harness as it was still saving me from the pierce attacks, but the Askven headbutts could break my shield in a single hit and kill me with a second. They also can knock you back, which is never great when you're surrounded by lava. Getting high ground was really the only way to deal with the Askven, but there are other dangerous things lurking in the skies in the Ashlands. The Fallen Valkyries. They might be the most terrifying enemy in Valheim. They're creepy looking, they make chilling noises, and they can pack a punch. The only saving grace is they seem a bit blind, and I found they didn't always detect me when I was sure they would. Therefore, you can sometimes avoid them, but they tend to hang out around charred fortresses, so I had to face my fears and fight one for the first time. I managed to do some decent damage while kiting it back to my Diverger friends who finished the job. This gave me my first Celestial Feathers, which turned out to be one of the most important drops. Back to the fortress, it was time to lay siege. The name of the game is to get the high ground and bombard the fortress from a distance. This actually makes the fortresses pretty easy, and the risk is everything outside the walls trying to kill you while you get set up. The Staff of Embers is the perfect weapon for this. It only takes a few fireballs to take down the Skug turrets and a few more to take out the spawners. Once I felt I'd thinned them out enough, I built up as high as I could and used the feather cape to glide over the walls. Once over the walls, the only real remaining threat are these guys. The Charred Warlock. They can summon Charred to swarm you, but the real danger is their green fire attack, which does massive damage.
Made worse by the fact that I kept forgetting to use fire resist meads to counter my gear weaknesses to fire. With the fortress taken, I looted the chest outside the middle tower and was lucky to get a jade and a bloodstone. Remember the celestial feathers? Well, along with that jade I just found, Randolph can build what is arguably the best magic weapon in Valheim, the Staff of the Wild. On paper its stats aren't that impressive, but in practice it absolutely wrecks everything. Here's an example of a Morgan getting smashed a bit. Each cast does poison and blunt damage on impact before spawning a root that continues to slam everything in range. I don't think there's a limit to how many roots you can throw down, so you can surround enemies with several before they start to despawn. The Bloodstone allowed Randolph to make another weapon, the Troll Staff. It's a pretty fun weapon as it spawns a flaming troll skeleton. The only problem is it's hostile to everything, including you. I found the best use for the Troll Staff was as a distraction. Whenever things got a little too spicy, I could spawn one in and draw off some of the heat to make my escape. But be warned, the troll makes an impressive entrance and you don't want to be anywhere near it when it comes in. Back in the fortress, I built a battering ram to smash down the center tower gate and pick up my first bell fragment. 9 of these are required to summon the final boss. I also now have the required resources to make a stone portal, which allows you to transport metals. This is very handy and gave me a way to transport my flame metal ore. I didn't really have much need for the flame metal ore in this playthrough, but I was also now able to transport iron and black metal, which was useful. The next part of the playthrough was a bit of a loop. I would explore in search of fortresses, clear them out the same way as before, and collect the resources. I often left a portal inside the fortress as a safe outpost. Although the gameplay was repetitive, it was by no means easy, and I died a number of times. And perhaps this is a good opportunity to demonstrate a typical Ashlands experience. It may start with a few charred, which is no big deal, but when you throw in an ashkin, things are starting to get a little hot. So you decide to bring in a troll to distract them. Great, now we can make a run for it. Oh wait, a wild Morgan has appeared. No problem, let's get the high ground.
Surprise, motherfucker!
That's right, a Valkyrie ambush. Looks like we need another troll. So yeah, that about sums up the Ashlands experience. It took a while and a few deaths, but Randolph managed to capture 5 forts and collect all the bell fragments needed. And while doing so, we also took on as many fallen Valkyrie as we could find to amass enough celestial feathers to upgrade the Galder table and max out the Staff of the Wild. With some of the Aspkin hides we collected, Randolph was able to make the hood and pants of Embla. This slightly upgraded his armor and his eater regen. And finally, with all the new ingredients found in the Ashlands, Randolph made better foods and meads. It was now at last time to take on Heldör. Unfortunately, with all the deaths Randolph had lately, we were a bit lacking in the blood magic skill. But with day 300 fast approaching, I figured it was as good a milestone as any to try to finish up this challenge. One of the Diverger outposts relatively close to the Heldör arena was no longer occupied, which may or may not be my fault. Either way, I moved in and made an outpost to retreat to or respawn at if I died. I tried to clear out the area around the Heldör spawn, and made some raised earth pillars that I could use to get away from any extra enemies that may wander in during the fight. I placed the 3 bells, chugged a bunch of meads, and summoned the boss. The plan here was to summon 2 trolls as soon as possible so Heldör would land and be distracted by them while I pelted him with the Staff of the Wild. This worked fairly well in the beginning, but Heldör is a massive tank with 25,000 HP, and like every other boss, his health regens over time, so DPS is the name of the game. At around 75% health, he starts spamming crazy AoE attacks that cover the ground in green glow before flaming spikes shoot out of the ground. It's not too hard to avoid, but it does a lot of damage if you get stuck in it. And because of this attack, this part of the fight is non-stop running and gunning, while you try to outpace his healing factor by dealing as much damage as possible. Once he reaches 50%, he starts spawning charred, and also his AoE attacks become more frequent. On the bright side, his AoE attacks do damage to his own minions, so you can usually just kite them around and they're killed by his attack. Because of his massive health pool, this fight takes so long that I had to run back to my outpost, return to base, and re-up my rested buff. He healed a bit during this time, but it's well worth it, as not having the rested buff in this fight is almost certain death. Finally, when he gets low health, he really starts spamming his attacks, and the strategy stays the same, but it's harder to find safe ground with all the fire and spikes everywhere. Towards the end of the fight, the trolls are almost useless, as they barely can distract him long enough before they're killed. But the vines continue to hit hard, so long as you can keep your eater up to keep firing them. After almost 30 minutes, victory was mine, and this challenge is complete in just under 300 days. So, can you beat Valheim with magic-only weapons? Yes, well, sort of. There is no way to progress to magic weapons without using some other means to fight. Did I find it worth it? Not really. It was a fun idea, but very unnecessarily frustrating in the beginning. I do hope the devs considered adding magic sooner in the game, as it would be nice to have 1 or 2 options before the Mistlands to play a true mage playthrough. When the Bogwitch update came out during this challenge, I was excited that maybe they would consider adding some magic in the swamps. Unfortunately, they decided not to. Anyway, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. I had a lot of fun with this one, and it was by far the biggest project on the channel to date. If you enjoyed this style of video, let us know by leaving a comment below, and please consider subscribing and liking as it really helps us out. Bye for now.